Hello and welcome to Conversations with Defenders in this special 6-part series dedicated to our 16 Days of Activism campaign, Her Fight, Our Rights. We are honored to host Ambassador Hugues Chantry, the Ambassador of the Kingdom of Belgium to the Republic of Uganda and the Republic of South Sudan. Your Excellency, you're most welcome.
Thank you for having me.
You are joining us at the tail end of 16 Days of Activism. So we'll start by asking you, how has it been these past 16 days of activism against GBV?
Well, it has been active not only for me, but also for my colleagues, the ambassadors of the different EU countries we have here in Kampala, and also to the EU delegation, and also to our friends of ENABEL, the Belgian Development Agency, and our friends of the UN. And actually, the fact that it has been so intense and with so many actors is a testament to the fact that we indeed are facing a real global problem. And you know, last week I had a meeting with the staff of ENABEL at their office here in Kampala, together with a couple of local and international NGOs. And in my speech to them, I just told them, 16 days of activism against gender-based violence, that sounds very long. As you know, most of the time the campaigns, the international campaigns, for instance, for the right of the children, so that kind of rights, it's only one day, and here we have 16 days. Mm-hmm. But when you think about it, well, 16 days, it's not too long, it's too short. Yes. It's too short because that problem, as I said, is really a global one. It's not only in Uganda, not only in South Sudan, it's everywhere in the world. And we should have activism all the year, 365 days a year, because the problem is really overwhelming and everywhere.
Yes, and I believe that for the Kingdom of Belgium, it has been what we have seen from 2021, the adaptation that came in from the Belgium's National Action Plan to combat gender-based violence, where between 2021 to 2025 outlines on comprehensive measures to prevent the violence, to protect the victims, to prosecute the perpetrators with inclusivity of all. Mm-hmm. And there's something to pick for each and everyone who's listening in, and maybe you could share on that.
No, absolutely. But I would start by saying that this National Action Plan we launched in 2021 is actually already the 6th one. That means that we started actually many years ago with that kind of plan, and that means that we take the problem very seriously, and that means also that there is for such a problem no quick fix. And definitely we have to be active on different fields, on a different aspect of the society. And as you mentioned, in the last action plan, we put some emphasis on the prosecution of the perpetrators of that kind of violence. Because, when you have a look at the statistics, you see that the situation, even in rich countries, is far from perfect. And for instance, it's just an example, but when it comes to gender-based violence in the family, we see that many of the violent acts are not reported to the police, or that the acts of violence have been reported but no action has been taken. And when you consider the femicide, that means actually the murder of a girl or woman by her partner or husband, when you consider that, you see that it is a problem we are still confronted with very much, also in our rich countries. And that means that definitely many things, many focus has to be put on the prosecution of the perpetrators. Because it's not only in Uganda, probably, that still too many people consider that, well, gender-based violence, it's not a big deal. That gender-based violence are the norm. But it is not the norm.
Yes.
And that means still a lot has to be done on many fields, as I said. I think especially about education. That's where everything starts, actually. Then education is key. But after that, we need also to have functioning institutions. And in the case of Belgium, with the prosecution, we want, the police functioning better. We want the justice functioning better, because it is absolutely key. Of course, we may regret that we have to come to that point where we need, justice and police. That should be avoided, and that's why I come back to my first point. Education is key.
Yes.
Because their prevention, that is where actually everything starts. And prevention can only come from a right education. And when we speak about education, we have a tendency to believe that it is only for the schools.
Exactly.
But no, it starts at home.
Yes.
And there is a lot to be done. And when we consider the way all of us we behave, we have a tendency to reproduce the behavior we have seen from adults when we were kids.
Yes.
And that is absolutely key. That parents, and I would say especially fathers, understands that they need to give a good example. They need to give a good example to their kids, because how can you imagine that a boy who will become a man will not find it normal to hit his future wife if he has seen his father hitting his own mother?
Yes.
And then he will find it pretty normal. And we have a real danger to have a reproduction of the same behavior all over the years and the generation, through the generations. And that's why education is really absolute key.
Yes.
Now, that being said, our national plan is, of course, focused on the individuals, but also on the institutions, because the institutions indeed have to play their part. I spoke about the police, about the justice, but it is actually true for many ministries and institutions. And also, it is true that the first kind of gender-based violence we see all over the world is happened in the family. But it also happens in other, in other circles, at work, in the schools. And there also, when we are speaking about that kind of gender-based violence, it is quite clear that the institutions, being the schools in that case, or being the enterprises, the companies, or the ministries, because there are people working also in ministries, that means that definitely these institutions have to take the problem seriously.
When we talk about them taking it seriously, it also goes back to just what policies are in place. And a number of times, those are also lacking in one way or another. Where would you say, do we hold the institutions to hold themselves accountable?
Actually, and it is interesting to see that in all countries, but I think it's extremely acute in a country like Uganda or even a country like South Sudan, very often we have in place the right regulations. We have in place the laws, all the legislative framework we need is just there, but we just don't implement it. And that is actually the main problem. And the implementation, of course, is will only be possible once people, a vast majority of people understand how important these laws and regulations are to make their life easier. It's not to make the life of people more difficult,
Yes.
It is just to make the life in society easier. And it's the implementation of these kind of regulations makes life easier. I will take an example. And I think many Ugandans will understand that example. It has nothing to do with gender-based violence. But when it comes to traffic regulation, look how people are driving, in Kampala. And I can tell you, coming from abroad,
Yes.
it's just a plain disaster, what I see here.
Yes.
And 99% of the problems comes from the fact that people are not actually abiding by the rules.
Yes.
But of course, there is another aspect here, I think, that plays a role here in Uganda. There are actually two reasons to forget about the rules. The first reason is that you don't know that they do exist. You have never heard of them. And that's why such a campaign is important, to raise awareness. But of course, the other reasons is that, well, you know perfectly well that these rules and regulations are there, but you just don't bother. And there again, that's why such an activism campaign is important, because yes, you have each of us has excellent reasons to take these rules seriously and to abide by the rules. And indeed, how can we push the institutions actually to be sure that their rules are implemented? Indeed, putting pressure on them, reminding them that it is important and they have a responsibility as an institution to be sure that these rules are actually implemented. But also, it's an invitation to these institutions to also make their, to reach out to the people, to explain why these rules are in place and why they are so important. That means putting pressure on the institution. That is basically key. And it's not there again. It's not only for just the regulations regarding the fight against gender-based violence. No. It's true for all kinds of regulations. People have to understand why these regulations are there and why they are so important and how abiding by them will help everybody in the society.
Once they understand that, then we're all able to be a part of the fight.
Absolutely.
And get our rights. And it also, as you were speaking, it also reminds me that sometimes maybe it also comes hand in hand with poverty in one way or another. When someone has the upper hand and someone is holding you to, if you actually call me out on this, you could lose your livelihood. So how do these two, where do you see the line over the years? Where is poverty? Is it playing a bigger part in exacerbating gender-based violence now more than ever, or is it slowly being unraveled?
Well, I cannot speak about Uganda because I've been here only 1 year, and I still need more interactions with Ugandans actually to better understand how their society and how their communities are functioning. But as a matter of fact, based on my own experience in my own country, I have seen the evolution in the society. And indeed, on two levels. We got richer and richer, and quite obviously, that helps many things. But also, people became more aware because of awareness campaign, because of legislation, new legislation being put in place and implemented. We have seen that people are finding many things on which my grandparents, for instance, never thought. Now we think about that and we find it perfectly okay and acceptable and doable. But not to come back on the poverty aspect. It is quite clear that that raising people out of poverty will bring many benefits, not only for the individuals, but for the whole society. We have seen that in so many countries. It's not. How would I say? Maybe studies have been done, and written on that aspect, but I cannot say with an absolute certainty that the main driver of gender-based violence is poverty. But one thing is quite clear to me: poverty doesn't help. That is, of course, quite obvious for many people. When you are living in a very harsh economic condition, you will actually develop stress. With stress, you may develop, alcoholism. And one thing is sure, alcoholism, that is always bad.
Yes.
That is always bad, and at the end, the partners or the kids actually will pay the price of the alcoholism, most of the time of the father or of the partner. And definitely there is a link between poverty and alcoholism, and that is quite obvious. And that is, thanks God I wasn't yet born at that time, but in my own region, in Belgium, I come from a coal mine region where we had a lot of mines. And in the 19th century and the first half of the 20th century, and all of us in my region, we have heard of these stories of the miners coming out of the coal mine and just drinking all their salary and so, and with all the social and consequences of that. And that was quite obvious. It was like that, now about 60, 70 years ago in my region in Belgium, and it is exactly the same everywhere in the world, because human nature is the same everywhere, and that means that is to me quite clear that poverty plays a role, and that is by the way one of the reasons why in all our programs that we developed and implement with Enabel, for instance, but also with NGOs or through the UN, which always try to have many aspects taken aboard, and one of them is to make to give to the people we may help. Of course, the problem is that we cannot help everybody.
That's
but
true.
To give them the possibility to get a decent work, to be able to make a living, not only for themselves but for the family, and of course we know if we have that, many of the other problems we see, like gender-based violence, will be reduced. That being said, the wearing awareness on gender-based violence, or also on any kind of discrimination, and so this is the kind of, I would say, horizontal objectives we always have in all of our programs, being implemented by Enabel or by the Belgian NGOs like Caritas. Actually, Caritas is working a lot in the refugee settlements for especially for women and girls there, but also as I said, the UN agencies like UNICEF, and all these programs, they have always that kind of horizontal, generic objectives, because it's key for everything.
I would say it is, and I'd also bring it to the side of the women human rights defenders.
Yeah.
Yes, the conversation that we're getting into now. When we take a look at women human rights defenders standing up for the rights of many, at a cost a number of times, and if we're just looking at Uganda, but all across the continent, it is happening. How is it essential to have them addressing the gender-based violence against women and girls?
It's quite my first answer is quite obvious, because they are themselves the first victims of that kind of gender-based violence, and they are the best placed. Sorry. They are the best placed actually to address that kind of problem, and also, and that is important, to let their sisters understand that some behaviors are not okay at all. Because very often women are not aware of their rights and or they are not aware at all of what should be normal, relations between people. Yes. And because there again, and I come back to that point on education, they have seen that as kids, they have seen that all over the place.
It's all they know.
Yeah, that's all they know, exactly. And indeed, these human rights defenders, all of them, I would say, because men, again,
part of
have a role to play. That's quite clear. But when it comes specifically to women human rights defenders, they are definitely the best place to do that. And we can see that it's not easy. Here we are talking together, and we have no problems. That is easy. It may sound a little bit theoretical, but for these girls and women doing the job on the ground, it's not easy. It's not easy because they have to fight against stereotypes. They have to find about social norms. And it is, really difficult to raise awareness by people when these people don't understand, to start with, that there is a problem.
Yes. Yes.
And definitely, I must say, I've seen many of them, especially when in one of my former postings when I was in the Congo, in the Kivu, and there I've seen actually what kind of impact the human rights defenders may have. And I would say it's interesting, of course, having our dialogue in the framework of a series organized by DefendDefenders, and DefendDefenders is a well-established NGO. But the women I'm speaking about, these I've seen in DRC, many of them were no part of any organization. They came themselves to the conclusion, oops, there is really something to be done here. Yes. And that means, there again, it's not only the institutions, it's not only the NGOs, it's not only the government, it is also the individuals that have to be done, and especially the female individuals. Another example, of course, it's far away from Uganda or South Sudan, but look at what's happening now in Afghanistan. With the regime of the Taliban there, it is quite clear that life is not rosy at all for the general population, but especially for women.
Yes.
And because of all the stereotypes, actually that are defended by the regime itself. And there, what do we see? Many girls, many women, sometimes men, but many girls and women are saying, oh, stop, there is here a problem. For instance, girls, why should it be impossible for girls to go to school like boys are going to school? That is actually key. And there the situation is really harsh, and also because, the international community, especially the Western donors, are not really active anymore in Afghanistan. Then these girls and women, they know that they will not get much support from outside.
Yes.
And still they are doing the job, And and they are taking many, many risks to do that. And that is actually something that should inspire us.
What you mentioned all through the fight that the woman human rights defender, whether in South Sudan, whether in Uganda, whether in Afghanistan, it talks about courage in the face of adversity. What does courage look like? Even as much as they may try to push them down, what should they be focusing on?
Well, I would say first, maybe prioritize what you would like to fight for, because there are many problems encountered by girls and women all around the world, but some of them are more acute than others. That is, I would say, the first thing, and one of these things is education. But when you think about the right to education, the right to go to school, when you think about that, then many social aspects are related to it. For instance, early marriage. That is definitely a big problem in a country like Afghanistan. But it is also a problem here in Uganda. It's also a problem in South Sudan. If you know how it comes, especially in poor families. And so when a girl has to be married against her will, by the way, to an older man, then that's the end of all our prospects for education. And that means no education. That means also she will reduce, by not going to school, she will reduce her chance to get a good job. She will probably be stuck at home, actually. She will have no many choices in her life. Then, to come back to your question, yet focus on what are the priority, and I would say one of the biggest one is the right to have access to education. That is actually one of the most important things. But there again, how can you express actually that willingness to open up the access of schools to girls? Well, also by fighting against early marriages. That is a good example, and that is, I know, and that will speak to many people here in Uganda, because many of them do not have the choice.
And when we talk about, as you mentioned it, the education bit, sometimes we may just think of, like you said earlier, education, what we learn is also at home, it's all through our life, but also it talks into these small things, these small skills that you can pick up, these little conversations you can be a part of in different areas, the networking that women human rights defenders, these spaces they need to be a part of. Where do we put the networking in? Because if we're looking at the grassroots woman human rights defender, she may not have many opportunities to be a part of what we call maybe trainings, but she could be a part of conversations that she could pick something from.
Absolutely. No, you're absolutely right. And I would even go further. Everybody has conversations, everybody. But of course, you need to have access to the right conversations here. And also sometimes, many people are afraid to take part in conversation because they would think, it's not for me, it's a conversation for grown-ups and so on and so on. And that means at the really root level, the human rights activists, especially the women human rights activists, could indeed focus on individual cases because it's not speaking to the masses. It's also very often is convincing one people.
Yes.
If you can convince, in your village, if you can convince, let's say, a girl per month that yes, she should be interested in her rights and what, for instance, when it comes to education and so on, that's already a big actually step in the right direction. And because you need a multiplication actually of individual cases.
Yes.
And that is absolutely possible. And I would say also, it is less true in our Western rich countries than it is in Uganda, but also an important vector could be the churches. Mm-hmm. Because the churches, everybody goes to the church here, or to the mosque, or everybody. And we know that pastors and priests may have a real impact on the behavior of people, and they could help also a big deal actually by opening up the eyes of the folks to certain realities. Actually, it may be an economic reality, but it may be a social reality like early marriage. It may be the fight against corruption, and it may be many things. Yes. And the churches have definitely a role to play.
Yes, the conversations happen there every single week.
Absolutely.
Now let's turn to the well-being, the mental state of the woman human rights defender that we mentioned, the one who has seen the wrong, is trying to correct it by maybe having that conversation, but it's taking a toll on her. Mm-hmm. She still wants to be a part of the fight, but it's getting harder. What then do you tell her?
Well, keep the faith, I would say. Keep the faith in what you're doing. And of course, there again, we are speaking here in Kampala, it's easy for us, but try to find out if around you don't have sisters doing the same thing as you do, because together, of course, you will be stronger. And also, it is also one of the reasons why it is important that you have also that people of Uganda or South Sudan have also exchanges with people from outside, because that is also important to understand that what you are fighting for is also an issue in other places. It's important to also to have these kind of contacts to sometimes understand that you don't need to reinvent the wheel, because many of the conversations you could have at your local level to improve the situations, well, many of these conversations took place somewhere else in the world. And that means it is so important that you have this exchange with the foreign world. Of course, if you are in a very remote village in Uganda, it's difficult to have this in contact with the internet, with the outside world, I would say. But what is maybe easier is to have a contact with the local NGOs, because there are local NGOs. Of course, we have DefendDefenders, but there are many others, and all over the place actually. And there, I would like that, by the way, to come to a general point, which is important in all countries, and that means also in Uganda and South Sudan. It is important to have, generally speaking, a thriving civil society all over the place, all over the place. And of course, it's not always easy, because very often governments or authorities will be suspicious, actually, or could be suspicious. But I think it's, and we have seen that in our countries, it is definitely, if it's your first reaction as member of the government and so, it's a wrong one, because at the end of the day, a thriving civil society helps you, as leader of a country, of a department, whatever. They help you to improve your service to the population. And definitely, to come back to your questions, yes, try to find other people doing the same in your region. And then maybe if you are in villages, then look what we have as NGO in the towns next door. Yes. And then after that, look what's going on in Kampala. Like, for instance, what DefendDefenders is doing.
Right where you have stopped, you've mentioned DefendDefenders, we've talked about civil society for a bit, and we've also mentioned government in there. What steps can governments take to help protect women human rights defenders in their work?
I think there is, but it's almost an individual work to be done by all the leaders or whatever the level, actually. They have, again, to be convinced that the human rights defenders, being men or women, are not there to be a pain in the neck. They are there to help, and to help the society as a whole, but also to help the leaders of the society to find better ways, to discuss better ways, and by the way, it is also an aspect that we, at the level of Enabel, for instance, that we discuss a lot with the different ministries we are working with, actually. And there, what do we see? Once the discussion, the principle of the discussion on that topic of any given topic has been accepted, well, then it's really easy to have exchange, and then to improve the practices here with the best practices you can import from abroad, and so on and so on. And then definitely discussion with the civil society brings, and when you are a leader, brings you something positive.
Yes.
But of course you have to be convinced about that.
Yes. Now, the call to action, usually our conversations also include more of a call to action. As we have this, what do we want to see from this campaign, or from sitting down and having this brief conversation? And like you mentioned at the start, 16 days of activism, 16 days seem like a lot, but they're not.
No.
And it needs to be a conversation that's had throughout. So from your perspective, what message would you want someone who is watching or listening to this podcast to take with them when it comes to standing with women human rights defenders in their fight in their different societies and communities?
Well, but there again, it's going to be individual, how would I say, individual decisions, actually, that everybody has to take. But as a matter of fact, I think that we may find some inspiration when it comes what do we have to do all the year through. We may find some inspiration in something I already mentioned. All the programs Belgium is developing here through Enabel, through the NGOs, or through the UN. But by the way, it's not only Belgium. It's not by chance that on your back you have a European flag. The colleagues from other European countries are doing exactly the same, actually, those active, of course, in Uganda. And what is it? It is that in all the programs you have, it may be a program on the environment, it may be a program on education, it may be a program on the public health, but in all these programs, you will always find an aspect, actually, gender equality and the fight against gender-based violence, that you will always find them all over because it's so normal. It's part of it. And it's part of it all the year through. And that means in many of your actions you're doing every day on your daily life, it's the same basically. Because I've been speaking about programs of, agencies and so, but you have also your own program, raising the kids, having a job, and so everybody has got his or her own program. And on that program, always bring that aspect in your own program, and definitely things could change.
Yes, it definitely could. Now, talking of things changing, there's a wave that has hit the activism world, where we're seeing the Gen Z joining in. The younger generation is coming up. It's coming up strong. It's saying if something is wrong, we are going to call it out. Well, there might be some great opportunities there that they're taking up, but what would you be telling them, the girls that have joined the fight? What are the lessons for them to pick up and carry this mantle?
But I would say, first of all, it's not new. It's always funny when you tell that to young people. We older people, we have been young also some years ago.
Yes, there was another.
But and that was the same for our parents. That was the same for our grandparents, and so on and so on. Everybody's at a given moment, any given moment, has been young. And it is also there again. Human beings are the same all over the world and all over the centuries. The young people always find that what the society is doing is not wrong, should be changed, and so on and so on. And yes, it's a natural phenomenon actually, and it's not particular to Uganda or South Sudan, not at all.
Yes.
Now, when I see all the evolutions that happened in other countries, and so, I would say pick up your fight, and because you cannot. It's maybe sad to say that, but you cannot change a society overnight. Even if you are many of you, and it is, when you speak about the youth, it is definitely the case in a country like Uganda, where you have a very, very young population. It's not because you have so many that, boom, you will be able to change the society and the country overnight. Then pick up your fights. And for instance, gender-based violence, that is a good aspect. But in gender-based violence, maybe you could even focus more on, let's say, the right to have access to education for everybody. And sorry, I've used the word education a lot.
Yeah, it's all right.
But it's because it's so central to me, in my eyes. There it starts. And definitely pick up your fight. But it's just, it's not even a recommendation. It's just an example, because there are many, many other aspects you could work on, early marriage and so, and that is another example. And pick up your fights, and then keep of course your line. That is quite obvious.
Yes, stay there and focus on that and do right there. Looking ahead, as we approach the 30th anniversary of the Beijing Platform for Action, which this particular theme is around, how does Belgium envision its role in advancing the rights of women and women human rights defenders within the framework of the SDGs and the international commitments?
But there again, that is interesting actually to approach that particular problem of gender-based violence through that framework, UN framework, and especially the SDG framework. Because SDG, there again, it's about everything. It's about everything, The fight against climate change. It's about the leaving nobody behind.
Yes.
It is about creating jobs opportunities, and I would say horizontally in all the SDGs, you will have always the fight for and the defense of human rights. And GBV, gender-based violence, or the fight against gender-based violence, is definitely a part that we should find again in all the different programs we will implement. Now, there is also another aspect, and that we should never forget. SDG came from the UN, the United Nations. You have that international aspects, and that is absolutely key, because we are convinced that many things will change in the world, hopefully for the better, only if you have a coalition of countries pushing for it, pushing in the right direction.
Yes.
And that is absolutely a key objective, actually. That is quite obvious. Now, I must say, on most aspect of the SDGs, when we do speak with the government of Uganda, that we very quickly come to the conclusion that we share 99% actually of the objectives. That's but still, that, for instance, that Uganda and also Belgium, because it goes in both directions, we can learn also from the experiences of the others, because that is also key. I said I used the metaphor already once, but very often we don't have to reinvent the wheel.
No.
And just look what your neighbor is doing, and maybe he is engaged in the right program, in the right direction. Just copy it.
Pick it up. There's nothing wrong with learning and taking something
absolutely
ahead. Well, we're wrapping up the conversation. This is our last question to you, which is, what message do you have for that woman human rights defender who's watching and listening, to that human rights defender who's watching? Because, like you have rightly put, the fight against gender-based violence is not only for the woman. The men are a part of it, the boys are a part of it. Yes.
First of all, the first thing, and maybe I should have started with that. Thank you. That is really the first things I can tell you. Thank you, because we need you. We need you in Uganda. We need you in South Sudan. We need you in Kenya. We need you in Bolivia. We need you in Argentina. We need you in Belgium. Everywhere. That is so important, what you're doing. And we know that sometime you are, because of your engagement, because of what you are doing, you are facing, troubles, to put it lightly. But keep faith, because yes, you are doing the right things. Please keep faith, keep doing it, and be patient. Because there again, and sorry, that's a funny message to young people especially, but yes, changing things overnight, that is extremely difficult, if not impossible. Then be patient, yes. And keep faith.
Keep the faith.
Yeah.
Thank you so much, Ambassador Hugues Chantry, for joining us on Conversations with DefendDefenders. All we can tell you is that you out there, the woman human rights defender, your fight is giving many their right. So thank you once again.
Thank you.